For more than 200 years, the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina have been home for people of Cherokee, Scots-Irish, and African heritage. Archaeologists claim that the Cherokee first built villages and grew corn along the creeks and rivers of the southern Appalachians about 1000 A.D. But the Cherokees believe that their ancestors have always lived here, and that the first woman, Selu, taught them how to grow corn, and the first man, Kanati, brought them hunting. In the 18th century, some 150,000 Scots came to America by way of Ireland and established communities in Pennsylvania and Shenandoah Valley, then migrated into the southern mountains. A few of the wealthier Scots-Irish and English settlers owned African slaves, so with them came a third ethnic group to the Blue Ridge. Generations later, all three groups continue to raise their families here. Today, we will introduce you to the stories of three women, all in their 80s, all native to the region, all living independently in rural Appalachia.
I am a poor wayfaring stranger, traveling through this wearisome land. There's no sickness, toil, or danger in that bright land to which I'll go. I'm going there to see my mother. I'm going there, no more to roam. I'm only going.
Amanda Swimmer lives in the traditional Cherokee community of Big Cove, adjacent to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Descended from a famous Cherokee shaman, Amanda teaches pottery and volunteers regularly at a daycare center. Everyone there calls her Grandma Swimmer, and she is fluent in both Cherokee and English.
Honey, coldness got do with the noon. Doing the color. Touch got spoke that young sedition, touch go show wing. Well, my grandma was Louisa Sequoia, and my grandpa was Jekyll Sequoia. She was the loveliest grandma I had, and I look forward to see her every weekend. And then my mother was Molly Davis Sequoia, and my father was Running Wolf Sequoia. Daddy raised hogs, and he farmed all his life. Everything they plant, they had to be careful how they use it. And then they had rules. If you get your first corn, you don't blow it. They have to cool them down before you eat them. Because they said if you blow your corn, the wind will come and knock all your corn down and run it. Even potatoes, you don't blow them when you first eat new potatoes. And my daddy wouldn't let us throw no cobs outside until 7 days. We had to keep them in until 7 days, then he said throw them away. But that's the way his rules was. And then we'll have to gather up some corn, and then when he dig taters, we had to gather up the taters when he digged them. And then he raised cane and make his own syrup, and we just have to stay around and watch what they was doing. Well, the boys had to get chop wood carry wood in on the porch and do that. And then we had to carry water though for our mother when we was small from the spring, and we didn't have no water in the house. We just had one room in this log house, but we had upstairs. We sleep upstairs, and downstairs they just had 2 beds in there in one room. And then we just didn't have no stove. My mother had to cook on the fireplace, and we rode up in that house right there all together. And my mother done all the sewing on our clothes, and she sewed quilts, and she crocheted, and then she made baskets. So that's the way we had to live through. And she had a lot of things that she canned and put away for the winter. She canned beans, cabbage, and well, she put the taters in the ground and cover them up. Even cabbage, they cover them up. Well, we had to help our mama around in the house and wash dishes and let her do the cooking. We didn't have to say no or after a while. And when she told us to do something, we had to do it right then. We never did say nothing back to our mother or fuss back to our mother, nothing. And that it was a lot easy way back, I think, when I was growing up. All we done is go out and climb trees and swing on this grapevine, make a swing out there, and that's the only thing we had to play with. Mostly we just stayed outside in the woods and play around, play tag around by the trees and things like that. Well, I was 10 years old. I remember everything what we've done. We played with the boys, and we just go around the house, and we didn't get nowhere. Not from the house, we had to stay around close where our parents could watch us. And we played good and got along good. And our daddies told us to love our brothers and sisters, and when we was growing up, and that's where he was growed up. We didn't have too much dancing. We just go up and visit some people up the road. All we done is play records, and they had a record player, and you had to wind it with your hand. And the girls that lives above us, they know how to dance, but we didn't. We was kind of bashful to do things like that, and we just go and play with them after dark, and then we'd come home. And that's the only place we had to go. And we had to walk about 4 miles to the school. And they wouldn't even let us stay home unless we're sick. They made us go. And we had to get up and walk on the railroad track all the way to the school and back home. And we didn't have nothing to ride with. We just had to walk. So I was the only smallest one to go to school, and they have to drag me down the road. We all had to stay in one room, and they had certain places we all had to take certain classes, like geography and arithmetic and all that. And they didn't teach Cherokee that time. We had to read in English. We talked in English. They went to the 8th grade. I just went to the 4th. I didn't finish my school. We went to a Baptist church. We went every Sunday and Wednesday night. We had to walk and carry lamps and put oil in a bottle, make our lights, and put a rag in there, a piece of cloth, and it makes the light. And we carry them when we go to church. We went to church snow and rain. And that's the way we was raised. Well, we didn't have to go nowhere. We just had to go to Cherokee, to the town. We just had one store down there at that time. There wasn't that many. We couldn't even go to Selva and go to Waynesville like we do now. They didn't have no way getting over there. Only thing, we went to Cherokee and back home. Well, we had to get the medicine from our medicine man, whoever right close to us. We had to get them to get us some medicine if he knew what was wrong with. See, my mother couldn't doctor us. It won't take if you doctor your own family. It has to be somebody else. And he'll talk to the water out there and to get our medicine made. And then we couldn't give nobody our medicine, because you giving your medicine away if you give it away. Fever is, you can always use that weasel wood, and it's good for cough. Yellow root for sore throat. Then you can use hickory for your cuts, hickory bark, measles, and whooping cough, and chicken pox. That's all I had while I was growing up. I had my first baby about a year after that, and I had 9 children, and I got 22 grandchildren and great-grandchildren, 22.
To get to Mary Jane Queen's house, you have to travel some 30 minutes from Sylva, North Carolina. That's provided you don't get lost on all the twisting, turning country roads. Although today the route is paved all the way to her house, she prefers to leave her home only when necessary for church or groceries. But Mary Jane does perform her favorite ballads at local heritage festivals, and she remains a loyal gardener.
Good morning. This is Mary Jane Queen, and I was born in the Kenny Fork section. Well, this is Kenny Fork, but all of it together, but over on the other side of the mountain from here. To Jim Prince and Clarcy Nicholson Prince in 1914. That's been a few years. And my mother was from, I think she was Scotch-Irish. The Princes came from England, and well, of course, Scotland was where the Scotch-Irish came from. Lots of the Scotch-Irish settled in this area, and Dad was, so I was always told that he was part Indian. Now, whether that's so or not, I've got no way of proving that. But anyway, there was 11 of us children in all. My grandmother, Narcissus Prince, she lived in, well, some in the Kenny Fork section and on Moses Creek. And that's where she was living when she passed away, was on Moses Creek. I'd go stay a week with her at a time. I guess the most thing that you wanted me to talk about was my childhood. We had the living room, upstairs, and the kitchen. But we always had room. They had beds, 3 or 4 beds upstairs, had 2 rooms upstairs, and then had beds in the living room. One, like half of it was like a bedroom, and the other half was the living part of it, where we stayed all the time, of course. And then we had a big kitchen. We would usually get up around 7 o'clock. I mean, us children. My parents got up earlier than that, but us children get up around 7 o'clock when we had to go to school. And we walked it. We didn't have school buses back then. We had to walk. And it was about 8:30 when we would get to the schoolhouse. Every afternoon we came home and did chores. We had certain things we did. We had wood. We burnt wood. And every feller knew just exactly what he had to do. The boys fixed the wood, and I was usually the one that had to carry most of it in. Carry water. We didn't have water in the house, so we had to carry water. We carried in our wood, and when we got our work done on the outside, then we'd get our homework from school. And then after we got that done, if we got done in time, we could get out and play a while. We got our exercises back when I was growing up, because we did our chores, then we would get out and run and play, and we played ball, we played pitched horseshoes, we like I told you, we would ride the wagons and whatever we wanted to do. Back then, they was preaching at the Methodist Church on the first Sunday of the month, and then the third Sunday. And the Baptist Church, they was service on the second Sunday and on the fourth Sunday. So I went to both churches. I made no difference to me if there was Baptist, if there was Methodist. That didn't bother me. I didn't know nothing about that. I went to go to church. But we always celebrated Christmas and Thanksgiving more so than. Now we didn't take very much interest in Halloween. Back when we was growing up, I've had people to ask me if it wasn't very boring when I grew up. I said, not at all. I said, there's never a dull moment. My brothers would make wagons, and they made sleds, and we would ride those wagons. They'd go out in the woods, they'd find black gum with a holler in it, and then they'd cut them a hickory to make the axles out of, and they made the wagons, and they made a tongue to it that we could guide the wagon any way we wanted. And in the summertime we'd ride those, and in the wintertime they'd make sleds and we'd ride over the ice and snow. It just tickled me good to get to climb the peach trees, the apple trees, and the cherry trees to pick off cherries, apples, because I got to eat as long as I was up in that tree. Peaches, apples, cherries, whatever. And we always had the big red plums. Oh, they were good. My mother made plum butter. I never sat down at our table, and it was a long table. I never sat down at that table before it wasn't full of food. We always had plenty of vegetables, beans, corn, tomatoes, onions, whatever you grew in the garden. My mother and dad always had a big garden. They had sweet potatoes, onions, beets, carrots, whatever that we could grow, we did. Then we had chickens, we had turkeys, we had guineas, we had sheep, we had cattle, and of course always 2 horses. And to do the farm work with, and to pull the wagon, and all these things that you have to use horses for. My dad always grew molasses cane, and we'd strip the fodder off of it, the blades, and then my brother would go through and cut the heads all off of it. Then they'd cut the cane down and haul it to the cane mill. Of course, my dad would always keep enough for the family, and he went down to Silva, and the Silva Supply, this colored guy worked in the basement, and he bought all kinds of produce, you know, from people, and then he would sell it out. So he furnished the syrup buckets, a gallon buckets, to put the syrup in. And my dad would, everybody back then had wagons, and they would go, after the syrup was made, he'd load the syrup, maybe potatoes, and take them down and sell them. And that is how they provided all the things that we had to buy. A lot of people has asked me, well, where did you get any money? You didn't have to have money back then. If you wanted anything that they had to sell, you just exchanged. They didn't give you the money. You just, you know, kept an account of what you traded. They give you the rest in money, and you went to whatever store you needed to go and buy clothing, shoes, whatever. We bought material to make clothing at the stores, and my mother taught us how to knit, us girls, and we knit socks for the boys and my dad, stockings for us, and mittens and caps, sweaters. We done a lot of that at home. We didn't have to buy that. And then, of course, they had to buy the material to make dresses. And back when my mother was growing up, my grandmother had a loom, and she made material for the men's shirts and for their pants and blankets. She wove it. There was 2 doctors in Silva, Big Doc Nichols and Little Doc Nichols. And in Cullowhee, there was a Mr. Ed Bryson. Doctors would come out to your home back then. Of course, they was midwives. And so, if you didn't have a doctor, you had a midwife. All my children was born here at home. Well, I was 21 when I got married, and my husband was 19. We had 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. And all of our children is still alive, thank the good Lord. But my husband passed away in 1984. He took emphysema. I guess the doctors told him it was from smoking, but now I don't know. But anyway, he passed away in '84.
Elizabeth Allen lives in the outskirts of Hendersonville, North Carolina, where virtually all of her neighbors seem to be related to her in some way. In this tight-knit community, Elizabeth is known for her clear singing voice and her champion fundraising abilities. Even at age 82, she keeps the church running.
I'm Elizabeth Allen, and I was born September the 6th, 1920. I was born here in Henderson County, Hendersonville, North Carolina. Well, my grandparents, I was about 6 years old when my grandmother died. But I loved her to death. She was paralyzed and she couldn't walk, but I loved her to death. And she always loved me because she didn't want to see Mama punish me at all. And I loved that. My grandfather lived until, he lived until I was in my last year of high school. But he was old and I had to help take care of him after school. But I loved him too, and both he and my grandmother, as long as she was with us, she loved me, and then he did the rest of the time. My parents, my mother married when I was about 4 years old. I didn't know my father, so it was just my mother. But she married a wonderful man. He just took care of me just like I was his child. Dad worked on the railroads. Some, and then he worked in a rock quarry and different jobs like that. And my mother would go out and do laundry work for people. Back then they didn't have washing machines, so they had to do hand laundry for people. And then sometimes they would get cooking jobs. She would. But that was about it. When I was small, I'd have to bring in kindling for the fireplace and help dust around in the house, little things like that to do. Of course, my mother let me, I wanted to learn to cook, and my mother let me start at a very young age. I had to stand on a box up to the tables to do my cooking. And she ordered me a little cookbook, and I went by that. So I really had a really good life. They would raise a garden. We'd have potatoes, green beans, peas, all kinds of things, and raise on meat. Pigs, and pig would go with me anywhere I go, the pig would go. And I just had fun with it all the time, and they were raising it for, meat for the family. And when they killed it, I wouldn't eat meat. No, they had killed my pet. We raised our own meats and had cows with our own milk and butter, chickens, and some turkeys and guineas. You had to go to the store and get sugar, coffee, and stuff like that, and go to the mill and have your corn ground, and you'd have to get flour at the store. Well, church we only went every Sunday and Wednesday nights. That was to prayer service. And unless they were having some kind of program or something at the church, then that would be extra. But when I was small, we had 3 churches in the community: Baptist, Methodist, and Holiness. And I didn't know until I was a great big child which one my mother belonged to, because I went to them all. My mother was strict about me going to church. And she loved church too, but she died at a very young age. She was about 47 when she died. I went to school, and I had chores to do after I got home, but I never got to play any until my schoolwork was ready for the next day at school. Mother had never let me play or do anything until I had my lessons. All the children played together. They didn't, because sometimes it was just only me that white children were only the ones I had to play with, being one, and the houses so far apart. But they weren't prejudiced to me. But I did know of some of them being that way. I went to school right here in Clear Creek. It was a little one-room building, and the teachers we had one teacher, and she taught every grade up through the 7th grade. I finished high school. It was only through the 11th grade. But I loved school the whole time I went. When I finished high school, I cried. All the others were throwing their hats in the air and jumping, but I was crying. And after I finished school, then it wasn't much longer until I got married, but I did work a couple of years. I got married when I was 19. My husband's name was Chris Allen. We had 10 children. We had 7 boys and 3 girls. People says, "Oh, why in the world she got all those children?" I said, "Well, I just love them, and so I said God gave them to me. So, and I said I'm gonna do my best with trying to raise them." And He provided for me. We got them all grown, and I think they're all doing very well. Family is always important to me. I thought people should put their family before the other things.
Oh, my Jesus, sit down, oh, sit down and rest a little while.
At the end of Elizabeth, Mary Jane, and Amanda's childhoods, the mountains began a major shift toward a tourism-driven economy. First opened in 1934, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park would be in just 2 decades the most heavily visited park in the United States. By World War II, the Blue Ridge Parkway connected the mountaintops between Shenandoah National Park in Virginia and the Smokies. Hendersonville has become a popular location for second homes and one of the top retirement spots in the country. Tourism has clearly shaped the adult lives of all 3 women.
We didn't have no tours until they built this road. When they fixed the dirt road, then we seen some cars coming up here. And that was, I guess I was about 13 years old and they start coming around. The first tours I had, the ranger brought them up here. He'd bring them up every Sunday. Sometimes they'd just be riding around and they'd stop in. That's when I started making pottery. I just burned them outside. I just made some small pottery and they'd buy them. So I didn't know I'd done any good or not, but they bought them.
Well, I suppose tourists must have been coming in here ever since I was big enough to know anybody, because they would be, when I remember, sometimes there were strange people would come, you know, get acquainted at church and come to my visit with my mother, and they would be up here with tourists. Tourists at that time would bring their help with them. It's time for the tourists when, you know, in the summer when they start seeing more cars on the road. But now they on there all winter long. Crowds, because lots of people has come here to retire, and it's just how it's grown.
There wasn't very many tourists till they got the parkway here. But after they got the parkway, of course, there was some tourists, you know, in Silva and through the community. From the time though the parkway was finished till now, it's thousands each year comes through, especially in the spring of the year when everything is a blossoming, and then in the fall of the year when the leaves all change.
I first went up there and worked. There's, I guess it was 1932 or 33, something like that. And when I first went up there, I went, started down to the relieving people for lunch. And then after that, about a year after that, then I went to the corn pounding at the cabin, helped them. And then they moved me over to the finger weaving, and I worked at the finger weaving. And then year after that, then I sat at the pottery. 2 years after that, then I sat there till I retired working. 35 years there when I retired.
In a way, it's real good, and in another way, it's not. Or at least I don't think so. Because when the tourist comes in and they want to buy a home, they pay what some of the people here in the community calls a small fortune for it. Then when they get ready, they don't keep it always. And when they get ready to sell it, they ask so much for it. None of the people that was raised in the community here can afford to buy it back.
Despite the fact that Amanda has worked for the tourism industry and Mary Jane participates in heritage festivals, none of the women see their own lives in terms of a modern tourism-driven economy. They are simply mountain women who have endured with the changes around them. Whereas they don't see major differences between each other, they are quick to point out major changes between then and now, between their own and their grandchildren's lives.
Times has certainly changed since I grew up. Back when we grew up, there was no fast food places to eat. And I think that has a vast big thing to do with the younger generation, because they all eat at them and they drink an awful lot of these soft drinks. And I don't think it's good for children. That's the reason there's so many overweight children, because they drink so much of these soft drinks and eat all of this fast food, and then they can go to the store and buy anything they want. And what they do, they come in and sit or lay in front of the TV and watch it. They don't have anything to work like we did. We worked when we come in from school. We had, it's like I said, we had our chores to do and we did them. But children don't do anything this day and time. Not many of them, maybe a few, but there are not many of them.
I can say everything's just changed for me. I just don't know what else it could be. It has changed a lot since I was growing up. It's not like it used to when I was a little kid. It was more happy. I was more happy when I was growing up. And like it is now, I don't have nothing to be happy about, except if I'm just happy about the Lord just saved me for another day.
Well, there's lots of changes, yes. Changes in the way of living, and the change of dress, and change of, well, just lots and lots of things have changed from it. I never, thought I would see when I was younger. Yes. Some of them for the good, and some of them for the bad. You have to keep such close watch on your kids nowadays. That keep them from doing the things you don't want them to do. I think you have to watch them more closely, keeping them for, and most now I see my children doing with their children is trying to keep their children busy so that they don't get into things like others do with the drugs and smoking and things like that.
Back then, people had time to visit other people. But today, people don't have that time. They don't take the time to visit people. They hardly take time to throw their hand up at you, much less visit.
They don't care nothing about the old people. And they don't care how they go along and don't try to hap them around. They just pass them by and like there ain't nothing there. And that's one thing I just always think a lot of people don't care nothing about for each other.
Used to, women wouldn't go out and have jobs like they do now. You see women driving trucks or everything else. Any other kind of job a man do, a woman can do it nowadays.
Surprisingly to us, all three women see themselves in terms of similarities rather than differences. They did not make sharp distinctions between Cherokee, Scots-Irish, or African-American experiences. They are all proud to be mountain women.
Yes, I like to be in the mountains.
I told people that I don't think I could ever learn to live in a town or a city where the houses was like your fingers. Because I said I've always had this freedom, and I still enjoy that.
I'd rather be right here than to be in a big city, in a town, away from everybody. And that's all I'm happy about, that I'm right here, and I don't want to go nowhere or move out of here.
I always did like to stay in the country. I had an aunt that died, that lived in town, and she left me her house, and the people asked me, "You going to move into it?" I said, "Nope." I said, "I don't want to be where I have to be." I said, "My children are small now," and they were small, and I said, "I don't want to have to be sitting on the porch or standing out with them in the street, keeping them from getting run over with cars." I said, "I live in the country and I can turn them loose and let them go and play whichever way they want to."
Our mountain heritage means an awful lot to me. It always has.
Well, all I can say, I'm proud that I'm a Indian, and I'm proud of it. And I said I'm proud to see the people, be friendly with them.
Yes, ma'am. Very proud. I'm just proud of my heritage, and I'm proud that I still live free in these mountains.
In the beautiful mountains of North Carolina, where I spent my happy childhood days, roaming these mountains, valleys, and dales.
On the head of Johns Creek, I met and married my true lover, and here in this valley I'll spend the rest of my days. In this valley our 8 children have a home. It was a pleasure to watch them grow.
But one day my true love had to go. Now I walk this beautiful valley alone, yet I am not alone, for Jesus, my Lord, is with me, and He will lead me home.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger, traveling through this wearisome land. There's no sickness, toil, or danger in that bright land to which I'll go. I'm going there to see my mother. I'm going there, no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm just going over home. know dark clouds will gather round me. I know my way will be rough and steep. Beauteous views lie just before me, for God's redeemed their vigil keep. I'm going there to see my Father. I'm going there, no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm just going over home. I'm going there to see my Jesus. He said he'd meet me when I come. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm just going over home. I'm just going over home.